What if your job description included, do not acknowledge the man in the third stall, or never turn your back on pump number 3? In a vast, empty expanse of Wyoming, one gas station's night shift comes with a rulebook that's less about customer service and more about survival. We're breaking down the unsettling, bizarre, and potentially terrifying regulations that dictate every move after midnight. The highway stretched out like a black ribbon across the Wyoming wasteland, disappearing into darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow the stars themselves. Exit 47 was nothing more than a weathered sign and a single building that sat like a forgotten island in an ocean of sagebrush and wind-carved stone. The Desert Rose gas station, though the sign hadn't displayed those words in full for at least a decade, stood as the only beacon of light for 70 miles in either direction. Jacob Hayes pulled his pickup truck into the gravel lot at exactly 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before his shift began. The previous night attendant, an older man everyone called Dodge, had been specific about timing. Never early, never late. Punctuality wasn't just professional courtesy here. It was apparently a matter of safety, though Dodge had never explained why. The fluorescent lights inside cast sickly yellow pools across the cracked asphalt. Beyond their reach, the darkness pressed close, thick and watchful. Jacob killed his engine and sat for a moment, studying the building. Something about it felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. The proportions seemed off, windows too narrow, the roof slightly tilted as though the whole structure had settled unevenly into the earth over decades. His phone buzzed. A text from his girlfriend, Emily. Still think this job is worth it? He did. The pay was inexplicably generous for what should have been minimum wage work. $1,800 a week to pump gas, stock shelves, and keep the register. The owner, whom Jacob had never met, conducted all business through a lawyer in Cheyenne. The arrangement was unusual, but Jacob's depleted bank account made it impossible to refuse. At 11:59, Jacob stepped out his truck. The wind hit him immediately, carrying with it a strange metallic taste and the distant howl of something that wasn't quite a coyote. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, and his breath formed clouds that hung in the air longer than they should have. Dodge was waiting by the door, a thermos of coffee clutched in both hands. His face, normally creased with the easy wrinkles of a man who laughed often, was drawn tight. The door opened before Jacob could knock. "You're here," Dodge said, relief evident in his voice. "Good. Come inside. Quickly." The interior was warmer, but not welcoming. The fluorescent lights hummed with an irregular pulse, and the air smelled of old coffee, cigarette smoke from decades past, and something else. Something like wet earth and copper pennies. "3 things before I leave," Dodge said, pulling a laminated card from his jacket pocket. "First, memorize this. Second, never deviate from what's written. Third, and this is the most important thing I'll ever tell you, when your shift ends at 6 a.m., you leave immediately. Don't clean up extra. Don't wait for your replacement. You walk out that door the second the sun clears the horizon." Jacob took the card. The rules. It said at the top in bold red letters. Below it, printed in neat black text, were 7 numbered items. Rule 1. Never acknowledge the vehicle at pump 3 between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. Keep your eyes on the register. It will leave on its own. Rule 2. If you hear scratching from the stockroom after 3 a.m., turn the radio to static at maximum volume for exactly 3 minutes. Do not investigate the source. Rule 3. Accept any form of payment without question or comment. Place unusual currency in the blue lockbox beneath the register. Do not make eye contact with customers who pay in antique coins, buttons, or teeth. Rule 4. The bathroom lights must be turned off between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. Do not enter the bathroom during this time, regardless of what you hear. Rule 5. If a customer asks for directions to the old place, Tell them it burned down in 1952. This is a lie. They will know it is a lie. They will leave satisfied. Rule 6. Never serve anyone who casts no reflection in the front windows. Apologize and tell them the pumps are temporarily offline. They will understand. Rule 7. At exactly 5:55 a.m., lock the front door from the inside. Remain behind the counter until full sunrise. If something knocks, do not answer. Jacob read through the list twice, certain this was an elaborate prank for the new guy. But Dodge's expression held no humor, only the worn exhaustion of someone who had seen things that defied comfortable explanation. This is a joke, right? Jacob finally asked. Dodge shook his head slowly. I worked here for 11 years. First week, I thought the same thing. Broke rule 2 on my third night. He pulled up his left sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in what looked like parallel scars. Dozens of them, as though something with many claws had grabbed him. I was lucky. The radio was close enough that I could reach it. Most people don't get a second chance here. The humor drained from Jacob's face. The scars were real, raised and white against tan skin, following no pattern consistent with any accident Jacob could imagine. What is this place? Jacob whispered. A way station, Dodge replied, pulling his sleeve back down. Has been for a long time. Longer than the gas station's been here. Indigenous folks had different words for it. Travelers stop here, but not all of them are traveling the same roads we are. He glanced toward the window, toward the darkness beyond. The rules keep both sides safe. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. And if I don't want to stay, then walk away now. I'll tell the lawyer you change your mind. Dodge's expression softened slightly. No shame in it. This job isn't for everyone. Jacob thought of Emily's student loans, of his mother's medical bills, of the eviction notice they'd received last month. $1,800 a week, 7 nights. He'd been a Marine, had done tours in places where following arbitrary rules meant survival. How different could this be? I'll stay, he said. Dodge nodded, unsurprised. Then listened carefully. The rules are in order of occurrence. You'll understand why by sunrise. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Keep a journal. Write down everything that happens, every detail, every irregularity. But never, ever read back through what you've written. Some things are better forgotten after they're documented. Before Jacob could ask what that meant, Dodge was gone, his truck's taillights disappearing down the highway within seconds, moving faster than seemed safe or reasonable. Jacob was alone now. The clock on the wall read 12:07 a.m. 5 hours and 53 minutes until sunrise. He looked down at the laminated card again, at Rule 1. Never acknowledge the vehicle at Pump 3 between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. 2 hours and 10 minutes from now, he would face the first test. The fluorescent lights flickered, and in that instant of darkness, Jacob could have sworn he saw something massive move past the window, something that walked on too many legs and left frost patterns on the glass despite the desert heat. The lights stabilized. The window was empty. Jacob's hands were shaking as he placed the rule card on the counter where he could see it clearly. Whatever Dodge had experienced here, whatever had carved those scars in his arm, was real, and Jacob was about to spend his first night alone with it. The radio on the shelf behind the register crackled to life unbidden, cycling through stations before settling on old country music. Hank Williams singing about loneliness in a voice that seemed to emanate from another era entirely. Jacob didn't remember turning it on. He wasn't sure he wanted to turn it off. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it sounds that might have been voices, might have been machinery, might have been something else entirely. Jacob checked the clock again. 12:11 a.m. The night had barely begun, and already the Desert Rose gas station felt less like a workplace and more like a threshold between worlds. With him, standing guard at the crossing, he pulled out his phone to text Emily, then noticed he had no signal, no bars, no indication the device recognized any network at all. He was truly isolated now, cut off from the familiar world, alone with nothing but a list of rules written by people who had learned them the hard way. The night stretched ahead like a vast, dark sea, and Jacob had just pushed off from shore with no clear sight of the opposite bank. The first hour passed in oppressive silence. Jacob had tried to busy himself with typical gas station tasks, checking inventory, wiping down counters, organizing candy bars that hadn't sold in years. Everything felt like preparation for something, though he couldn't name what. 3 customers came through in that first hour. A trucker who paid an exact change and left without speaking. A woman in a sedan who bought coffee and asked if the bathrooms were clean. Jacob said yes, though he hadn't checked them yet, and something told him he shouldn't. The woman thanked him and drove away, her car's headlights swallowed by the darkness within seconds. The third customer troubled him more. An elderly man in clothes that seemed decades out of style. A wool suit with a thin black tie, his shoes polished to an impossible shine. He'd purchased a pack of cigarettes, paying with a crisp $20 bill that felt too thick in Jacob's hands, the paper wrong somehow. First night, the old man had asked, his voice like wind through dry leaves. Yes, sir. You'll do fine if you remember they're more afraid of you than you are of them. The man smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. Most of them, anyway. Before Jacob could respond, the man had walked out, and his reflection in the front window had shown someone else entirely. A younger man in military fatigues, his face covered in mud and something darker. Jacob had blinked, and when he looked again, the parking lot was empty. No car, no tire tracks, no indication anyone had been there at all. The $20 bill in the register looked normal now, but Jacob's hands continued to shake. At 1:45 a.m., Jacob heard the first scratch from the stockroom. Just one, like fingernails on wood, then silence. He checked his watch. Too early for Rule 2. That didn't activate until after 3 a.m. So what was he supposed to do now? The rule card said nothing about scratching before 3 a.m. Jacob decided ignorance was the safer choice and turned his attention to a car pulling up to pump 5. A young couple, laughing, touching each other with the easy affection of new love. Jacob watched them through the window, envying their normalcy, their unawareness that they were stopping at a place where reality wore thin. They paid at the pump and left. The clock now read 2:08 a.m. 9 minutes until Rule 1 came into effect. Jacob positioned himself at the register, the rule card in front of him, his eyes fixed on the laminated text. Never acknowledge the vehicle at pump 3 between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. Keep your eyes on the register. It will leave on its own. At 2:14, he heard it. The sound of tires on gravel, the distinct crunch of a vehicle pulling into the lot. Jacob's instinct was to look up, to greet the customer, to perform his job. Instead, he forced his eyes downward, reading and rereading Rule 1, his heart hammering against his ribs. The vehicle stopped. He heard it clearly, the engine running with a peculiar rhythm, too slow, each cycle taking several seconds longer than it should. Not the smooth hum of modern engines, but something older, mechanical, like gears grinding against each other. 2:17 a.m. The fluorescent lights dimmed slightly, and the temperature dropped. Jacob's breath became visible, small clouds forming in front of his face. He kept his eyes locked on the counter, on the faded Formica surface, on a coffee stain shaped like a bird in flight. A sound reached him from pump 3, the metallic clank of a nozzle being lifted from its cradle. Someone or something was pumping gas. Jacob heard the click of the trigger, the flow of liquid through the hose. His peripheral vision screamed at him to look, to confirm what his other senses reported, but he held firm. Minutes crawled by. The air grew colder still, and Jacob realized he could see his breath crystallizing, tiny ice particles forming and falling like snow in the stagnant air of the gas station. The lights flickered, steadied, flickered again. The radio's country music distorted, the singer's voice dropping several octaves before returning to normal. In that moment of distortion, Jacob heard something beneath the music, whispering, dozens of voices speaking in unison, saying words he couldn't quite make out, but that filled him with a primal, wordless dread. The nozzle clanked back into place at pump 3. The trigger had never been released. It had simply stopped. Jacob heard no footsteps approaching the building, no door opening, no request for payment. Instead, he heard something else, the sound of the vehicle's door opening, then closing. Not a normal car door, but something heavier, the groan of metal that hadn't been oiled in a very long time. Don't look, don't look, don't look. His eyes watered from the strain of keeping them focused downward. Every instinct, every social conditioning, demanded he acknowledge the customer. But Dodge's scarred arm flashed in his memory, and Jacob held position. 2:19 a.m. The lights went out completely. Total darkness engulfed the gas station, a blackness so absolute that Jacob couldn't see his own hands on the counter. The engine at pump 3 continued its slow, grinding rhythm. Then, impossibly, he heard footsteps inside the building, not outside approaching the door, but inside, as though something had bypassed the physical barrier entirely. The footsteps were wrong. Too many of them, like someone walking on 4 legs but trying to mimic bipedal movement. They crossed the floor with irregular timing, sometimes fast, sometimes pausing for long moments between steps. Jacob's breath came in short gasps. The footsteps moved behind him, circling, and he felt the presence of something massive, something that displaced air and radiated cold like an open freezer. It moved closer, and Jacob felt breath on the back of his neck, hot when everything else was freezing, carrying the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber and something organic and rotting. Don't acknowledge it. Don't turn around. Don't move. The thing behind him made a sound, a low vibration that Jacob felt in his bones more than heard with his ears. It was trying to speak, he realized, trying to form words with a throat not designed for human language. The sound formed something almost like his name, drawn out, questioning. Jacob bit his tongue until he tasted blood, using the pain to anchor himself, to keep from responding, from turning, from acknowledging. 2:21 a.m. The lights flickered back on. Jacob didn't look up, didn't turn around, though every muscle in his body was coiled tight with the anticipation of attack. The footsteps resumed, moving away now, back toward the door that had never opened. Outside, the vehicle's engine revved once, that same slow grinding of metal on metal. Gravel crunched under heavy tires. The sound faded, moving away from the building, heading back toward the highway. 2:23 a.m. Jacob allowed himself to look up. The parking lot was empty. Pump 3 showed no transaction on the computer system, no gallons dispensed, no payment required. The temperature was returning to normal, the unnatural cold retreating like a tide. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. His hands trembled as he picked up the rule card, confirming what he'd just experienced. 6 minutes. He'd survived 6 minutes of Rule 1. His phone vibrated suddenly. Signal restored, showing a text from Emily sent an hour ago. I love you. Be safe. Jacob typed a response with shaking fingers. Love you too. All quiet here. The lie felt necessary, protective. How could he explain what had just happened when he wasn't entirely sure himself? He walked to the window and looked out at Pump 3. In the yellow glow of the overhead light, he could see something strange. Tire tracks in the gravel, leading to the pump and then away. But they were wrong. Too wide, spaced irregularly. And where they stopped at the pump, the gravel had been scorched black, as though something with burning tires had rested there. More concerning was what he saw in the window's reflection. His own face, pale and drawn, and behind him, for just a moment, the vague impression of something tall and spindly standing in the center of the store. When he spun around, nothing was there. The store was empty save for himself. Jacob checked the clock. 2:31 a.m. He'd survived the first rule. 6 more to go. And already his sense of reality felt compromised, the boundaries between possible and impossible beginning to blur. The scratching from the stockroom came again, more insistent now, and Jacob remembered. Rule 2 activated after 3 a.m. He had less than 30 minutes to prepare for whatever came next. The night was far from over, and the Desert Rose gas station was just beginning to reveal its secrets. Jacob pulled out the notebook Dodge had mentioned, found one in the drawer beneath the register, and began to write. The date, the time, the visitor at Pump 3. As he wrote, he noticed something disturbing. His handwriting kept changing, shifting between his normal script and something else, something more angular and violent, as though someone else was guiding his hand. He pulled away from the notebook, staring at the words he'd written. Most were his, but scattered throughout were other words in that alien script, words in a language he didn't recognize. The Desert Rose gas station had marked him somehow. The visitor at Pump 3 had left more than tire tracks. It had left a part of itself behind, and Jacob had the terrifying suspicion that he'd carried a piece of it inside him from the moment he'd felt its breath on his neck. Outside, the Wyoming darkness pressed close, and somewhere in that vast emptiness, the vehicle from Pump 3 traveled roads that existed in the spaces between maps, carrying its nameless driver toward destinations that had no earthly coordinates. The minutes between 2:31 and 3 a.m. felt longer than the previous 2 hours combined. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the encounter at Pump 3 had awakened something's attention. The fluorescent lights continued their irregular flickering, and shadows in the corners of the store seemed deeper than they should be, resistant to the harsh illumination. He positioned himself behind the counter with a clear view of both the stockroom door and the clock on the wall. The radio continued its cycle of old country music, occasionally interrupted by bursts of static that almost but not quite resolved into voices. Jacob had learned not to listen too closely to those moments. At 2:47 a.m., a pickup truck pulled in, and Jacob experienced a moment of intense relief at the prospect of human interaction. The driver was a woman in her 50s wearing a denim jacket and a trucker's cap, her face weathered by sun and wind into deep lines. She filled her tank, came inside to pay, and set exact cash on the counter. "You're new," she observed, her eyes sharp and assessing. "First night," Jacob admitted. She nodded slowly, glancing around the store as though checking for something specific. Her gaze lingered on the stockroom door for a moment before returning to Jacob. "You got the rules?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Here's one they don't write down. Trust your instincts, but don't trust your senses. This place lies to you. It shows you things that aren't there and hides things that are. The rules are the only truth." She picked up her change, then paused. "And whatever you do, don't try to understand why. People who dig too deep don't finish their contracts." Before Jacob could ask what she meant, she was gone, her truck's taillights disappearing into the night with the same impossible speed Dodge had shown. Jacob was beginning to suspect the urgency to leave this place had nothing to do with road safety and everything to do with something else. 2:58 a.m. Jacob turned up the radio preemptively, keeping it on a clear station playing Patsy Cline. His hand hovered near the dial, ready to switch it to static. Rule 2. If you hear scratching from the stockroom after 3 a.m., turn the radio to static at maximum volume for exactly 3 minutes. Do not investigate the source. The clock hand moved to 2:59. Jacob's mouth went dry. He realized he'd been holding his breath. 3 a.m. For a moment, nothing. Just the music, the hum of refrigerators, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. Then, from the stockroom, a single scratch. Soft at first, tentative, like someone testing the boundaries of what was possible. The scratch came again, longer this time, the sound of something dragging across metal shelving. Jacob's hand moved to the radio dial. Another scratch, then another, building in frequency and intensity. It sounded like dozens of hands clawing at the walls, at the door, at the barrier between the stockroom and the main area. He twisted the dial between stations, and the radio erupted with static, white noise at maximum volume. The sound was deafening, painful, filling every cubic inch of the gas station with meaningless audio chaos. But it wasn't quite meaningless. Jacob could hear something in the static, patterns that almost resolved into words, into music, into screaming. The scratching from the stockroom intensified, no longer playful or tentative, but furious, desperate. Whatever was back there didn't like the static. Jacob kept his eyes on the clock, counting down the 3 minutes. His hand stayed on the radio dial, fighting the urge to adjust the volume, to find clarity in the noise. Through the static, he heard pounding on the stockroom door, violent impacts that shook the entire structure. The lights flickered wildly now, and in the moments of darkness, Jacob saw something impossible. Shadows moving under the stockroom door, too many of them, flowing like liquid into the main store. 2 minutes. The pounding grew more violent. Cans fell from shelves. Bottles rattled in their coolers. The entire building seemed to shake with each impact. Jacob gripped the counter's edge, his knuckles white, his eyes locked on the clock face as the second hand made its agonizingly slow circuit. In the static, he heard his name. Not the garbled attempt from pump 3, but clear and distinct, spoken in his mother's voice. Then Emily's voice. Then voices of friends, of his old drill instructor, of his dead grandfather. All of them calling to him from the white noise, asking why he was ignoring them, begging him to turn down the radio so they could talk to him properly. Don't listen. It's lying. The woman said this place lies. 1 minute. The stockroom door bulged outward, the wood splintering, as though something massive was pressing against it from the other side. Jacob could see the outline of hands, too many fingers on each one, pressing through the wood like it was soft clay. 30 seconds. The static resolved briefly into a sound like weeping, thousands of voices crying in unison, before dissolving back into noise. The lights went out completely, and in the darkness, Jacob saw the stockroom door opening, saw things emerging, shapes that hurt to look at, that existed in too many dimensions for his eyes to properly process. 15 seconds. He couldn't breathe. The shapes were approaching the counter, leaving trails of something wet and dark on the floor. In the static, all the voices spoke at once. Turn it off, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. 10 seconds. The shapes reached the counter. Jacob felt cold appendages touching his arm, his face, his chest, feeling him like a blind person reading Braille. Each touch left numbness, spreading patches of his skin where sensation simply stopped. 5 seconds. The static grew louder still, impossibly loud, and Jacob realized blood was trickling from his ears. The shapes recoiled, retreating from the sound. 3 minutes exactly. Jacob twisted the dial back to the country music station. The static cut off instantly, replaced by Loretta Lynn singing about coal miners' daughters. The lights flickered back on. The stockroom door was closed and intact. The floor was dry. The shelves were undisturbed. But Jacob's arm, where the cold appendages had touched him, showed finger-shaped bruises already darkening to purple-black, each mark having too many finger impressions. 5 becoming 7 becoming 9 in patterns that made no anatomical sense. He collapsed against the back counter, gasping, his entire body shaking. 3 minutes. It had only been 3 minutes, but it felt like he'd aged years. The notebook lay open on the counter, and Jacob picked up the pen to document what had happened. But as he began to write, he realized something terrible. He couldn't remember exactly what he'd seen in the darkness. The memory was already fading, slipping away like a dream upon waking, leaving only the bruises and the bone-deep terror as evidence that anything had occurred. He wrote what he could: the scratching, the static, the cold touches. But the details, the true horror of what had emerged from the stockroom, refused to coalesce into words. Perhaps that was a mercy. Dodge had said to write, but never to read back. Now, Jacob understood why. Some experiences weren't meant to be fully remembered or revisited. 3:07 a.m. Jacob checked the rules card again. Rule 3. Accept any form of payment without question or comment. Place unusual currency in the blue lockbox beneath the register. Do not make eye contact with customers who pay in antique coins, buttons, or teeth. Teeth. Jacob hadn't focused on that detail before. Who would pay in teeth? As if summoned by the thought, headlights appeared on the highway, turning into the parking lot. A car that looked normal enough, a sedan from the 1990s, its paint faded but intact. It pulled up to pump 7, and a man got out. Even from a distance, in the yellow glow of the overhead lights, Jacob could see there was something wrong with the way he moved, his joints bending at slightly incorrect angles, his gait too smooth, like someone had learned to walk by watching videos, but had never quite mastered the subtle imperfections of human movement. The man pumped his gas without incident, then walked toward the building. As he approached, Jacob could see his face, handsome in a generic way, like a composite of features that should work together but somehow didn't. Eyes too symmetrical, smile too perfect. He wore a suit that looked expensive but decades out of style, the cut all wrong from modern fashion. The door opened, triggering the electronic chime. The man walked to the counter, his movements accompanied by a faint clicking sound, like ball bearings rolling in a hollow cavity. He smiled at Jacob, revealing those two perfect teeth, and reached into his pocket. "Pump 7, the man said. His voice was pleasant but artificial, like an AI-generated recording. He placed his payment on the counter. 7 teeth, molars, each one pristine and white, arranged in a neat row. They gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and Jacob noticed each tooth had a small number carved into it, 1 through 7. Jacob's eyes wanted to rise, to meet the customer's gaze, to demand an explanation for this impossible, horrifying payment. But Rule 3 was explicit. Accept any form of payment without question. No eye contact. He reached beneath the register, finding the blue lockbox Dodge had mentioned, a small metal container with a simple latch. His hands shaking, Jacob swept the teeth into the box without touching them directly, using the edge of a notepad to push them off the counter. As they fell into the container, each tooth clinked against the metal with a sound like wind chimes, and Jacob heard something else, tiny voices screaming. "Thank you," the man said, his too perfect smile never wavering. "See you next week." He turned and walked out, that same inhuman smoothness to his movement. Jacob kept his eyes down, counting slowly to 20 before allowing himself to look up. The car was pulling away, but as it passed under the overhead lights, Jacob saw something that made his blood freeze. The driver's seat was empty. The car drove itself out of the parking lot and onto the highway, heading north toward nothing but wilderness. Jacob opened the blue lockbox and immediately wished he hadn't. Inside were hundreds of items, none of them legal currency. Coins from countries that no longer existed, stamped with dates that hadn't occurred yet. Buttons made from materials he couldn't identify, some that seemed to be carved from bone, others that looked like crystallized darkness. And teeth, so many teeth, each carved with numbers, each still warm to the touch, as though freshly extracted. He closed the box quickly, shoving it back beneath the register. His shift was only half over, and already Jacob had experienced horrors he couldn't fully process or explain. The rules had kept him safe so far, but he couldn't shake the feeling that each encounter was taking something from him, leaving marks that went deeper than the bruises on his arm. The radio crackled, and through the static, Jacob heard laughter. Not threatening, exactly, but not friendly either. The sound of something amused by his fear, entertained by his compliance. He turned the dial, but the laughter followed him across every station before finally fading. Outside, the Wyoming night pressed against the windows like a living thing, patient and hungry, waiting for him to break the rules, to satisfy its curiosity about what happens when someone refuses to play by the regulations that kept this strange peace. Jacob glanced at the clock. 3:24 a.m. 2.5 hours until the bathroom lights had to go off. 2.5 hours to prepare for whatever Rule 4 would bring. The time between 3:24 and 4 a.m. brought a steady trickle of customers that Jacob found more disturbing than the supernatural encounters. They were people, real people by all appearances, but each one carried an indefinable wrongness that set his teeth on edge. A teenager bought energy drinks and beef jerky, paying in crumpled bills that felt slightly damp. The boy's reflection in the window showed him wearing different clothes, tattered and stained with something dark. When Jacob looked directly at him, the clothes were normal again. An elderly couple came in together, holding hands, speaking to each other in whispered tones. They bought nothing, just walked up and down the aisles for 10 minutes, occasionally reaching out to touch products without picking them up. When they left, Jacob noticed they'd moved in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly, their heads turning at precisely the same moment. In the parking lot, they climbed into separate cars and drove away in opposite directions. A man in coveralls asked for the bathroom key. Jacob had seen the key hanging on a hook behind the register, a large plastic tag attached to it stamped with restroom in faded letters. But when he reached for it, the key was gone. The man smiled knowingly, said, "That's all right. I know the way," and walked toward the bathroom anyway. Jacob heard the door open and close, but when he worked up the courage to check, the bathroom was empty, the door hanging slightly ajar. Each encounter left Jacob feeling more unmoored from reality, as though the gas station existed in a space where normal rules of existence held only conditional authority. He documented everything in the notebook, watching as his handwriting occasionally slipped into that alien script, writing words he couldn't read, but somehow knew were important. At 3:47 a.m., the scratching from the stockroom returned briefly. Jacob's hand flew to the radio dial, but the scratching stopped after only 3 strokes, as though whatever was back there was simply reminding him of its presence, establishing that it existed whether the rules acknowledged it or not. 3:52 a.m. Jacob read Rule 4 again, his stomach tightening with dread. The bathroom lights must be turned off between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. Do not enter the bathroom during this time, regardless of what you hear. Regardless of what you hear. That phrase promised nothing good. The bathroom was at the back of the building, past the stockroom door, down a short hallway that seemed to stretch longer than the building's external dimensions should allow. Jacob had used it once during his first hour, finding it surprisingly clean for a gas station restroom, though the mirror above the sink had been covered with a dark cloth. He hadn't questioned it then. Now he wondered if that cloth served a purpose beyond aesthetics. At 3:58 a.m., Jacob walked toward the bathroom, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. The hallway felt colder the further he went, the fluorescent light at the end flickering more insistently than the others. He could hear water dripping, steady and rhythmic, though he'd seen no leaks earlier. The bathroom door was closed. Jacob pressed his ear against it, listening. Silence, profound and absolute, as though the space beyond the door existed in a vacuum where sound couldn't propagate. He tested the handle, found it unlocked. Opening the door released a wave of cold air that carried the smell of chlorine and something organic, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The bathroom looked exactly as it had hours earlier. Single toilet stall, single sink, the covered mirror, tiles that were probably white once but had yellowed with age. The light switch was beside the door, currently in the up position, the single bulb above providing harsh illumination. 3:59 a.m. Jacob's hand hovered over the light switch. Every instinct screamed at him not to create darkness in this place, not to give whatever lurked in the shadows an advantage. But the rules that kept him alive so far. Dodge's scars proved what happened when you didn't follow them. 4 a.m. Jacob flipped the switch down. The darkness was immediate and total, swallowing the bathroom whole. But it wasn't the simple absence of light. This darkness had texture, weight, presence. Jacob could feel it pressing against his skin like water, could taste it in the back of his throat, metallic and bitter. He backed out of the bathroom quickly, pulling the door shut. The hallway seemed impossibly long now, the main store area distant and small, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. Jacob walked back toward the counter, each step feeling like he was moving through invisible resistance. Behind him, from the bathroom, he heard the first sound, water running in the sink. Not the normal flow of a faucet, but something heavier, more viscous, hitting the porcelain with thick splashes. Jacob kept walking, his pace steady despite the urge to run. More sounds emerged, the toilet flushing repeatedly, the stall door banging open and closed. And then something else. Footsteps. Wet footsteps like bare feet on tile, walking in circles around the small bathroom. One set became two, then three, then too many to count, all moving in different directions, creating a chaotic symphony of slapping sounds against the floor. Jacob reached the counter and gripped its edge, forcing himself not to look back down the hallway. The sounds grew louder, more insistent. He heard voices now, muffled and distorted as though speaking underwater. They were having a conversation, multiple people talking over each other, arguing about something in words that Jacob couldn't quite make out, but that filled him with inexplicable sadness. A spike of sound made him jump, something heavy hitting the bathroom door from the inside, like a body thrown against it. Then another impact, and another, a steady rhythm of violence. The door held, but Jacob could see it shaking even from this distance, could see the frame bending slightly with each blow. The impact stopped suddenly. In the silence that followed, Jacob heard breathing, heavy and labored, coming from the hallway. Not from the bathroom now, but closer, as though something had gotten out, was standing in the hallway, deciding what to do next. A voice called out, clear and distinct. "Hello? Is someone there? I need help." It was Emily's voice. Perfect imitation, every inflection exact, the slight rasp she got when she was tired. Jacob's heart clenched. Every fiber of his being wanted to respond, to go help her, to investigate. But Emily was home, 70 miles away, asleep in their apartment. This wasn't her. Couldn't be her. "Please," the voice called again, now tinged with panic. "There's something in here with me. Please help me." Jacob closed his eyes, his hand shaking. Do not enter the bathroom during this time, regardless of what you hear. The rule was clear. Whatever was using Emily's voice knew exactly which buttons to push, which appeals would be hardest to resist. "Jacob," the voice screamed, raw terror in every syllable. "Oh God, Jacob, it's touching me. It's..." The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by sounds that Jacob would never be able to adequately describe or forget. Wet tearing, crunching, and beneath it all, laughter. Not Emily's laughter, but something else. Something that had been wearing her voice like a mask and had now discarded it. Tears streamed down Jacob's face, his rational mind knowing it wasn't real, but his heart breaking anyway at the sound of someone he loved in agony. The sounds continued for minutes that stretched like hours, a performance of horror designed specifically for him, demonstrating exactly what would happen if he broke the rule, if he went to investigate. Then silence, absolute and complete, as though the bathroom had been sealed off from reality entirely. Jacob opened his eyes, wiping tears away with his sleeve. The hallway was empty, the bathroom door closed. The clock read 4:23 a.m., 37 minutes to go. A car pulled into the lot, and Jacob nearly sobbed with relief at the distraction. A young man, college-aged, came in to buy cigarettes and a lottery ticket. He seemed completely normal, completely human, and Jacob found himself wanting to talk to him, to hear a voice that wasn't soaked in supernatural menace. "Quiet night?" the young man asked, making small talk as Jacob rang up his purchase. "You could say that," Jacob managed, his voice hoarse. The young man glanced toward the hallway, toward the darkened bathroom, and his expression shifted slightly. "Man, I don't know how you do this job. This place has always freaked me out. My grandpa used to tell stories about it. Said his grandpa told him stories. Said this spot has been strange for as long as anyone can remember, back before there was even a building here." "What kind of stories?" Jacob asked, desperate for any context, any explanation. The young man shrugged. "Native American stuff, mostly. Something about this being a crossing point, a thin place where the boundaries get blurry. Tribes used to avoid it, or if they had to pass through, they'd leave offerings, follow certain protocols." He picked up his purchases. "Anyway, guess that's why the pay is so good, right? Hazard pay for dealing with the weird shit." He left before Jacob could ask more questions, and the gas station fell back into its oppressive quiet. Jacob checked the clock obsessively now, watching the minutes crawl by. 4:31, 4:38, 4:44. At 4:52, the sound from the bathroom returned, but different now. Singing, multiple voices in harmony, a hymn Jacob recognized from his childhood church. Amazing Grace, performed by a choir that sounded both beautiful and profoundly wrong. The notes slightly off-key in ways that created dissonance that scraped against his mind. The singing grew louder, more passionate, building towards some crescendo. At exactly 4:59, all the voices hit the same note simultaneously, a sound so pure and piercing that Jacob felt it in his bones, felt it vibrating every cell in his body. The windows rattled in their frames, bottles shook on their shelves, and for one moment, Jacob saw the bathroom door glow with brilliant white light that leaked around its edges. 5 a.m. The light vanished. The singing stopped mid-note. Jacob heard the bathroom light switch flip on by itself, heard the bulb flicker to life. The hallway looked completely normal now. The oppressive atmosphere lifted as though it had never existed. Jacob waited 5 minutes, then 10, before he worked up the courage to check the bathroom. He walked down the hallway slowly, half expecting something to lunge at him from the shadows. But the bathroom, when he opened the door, was exactly as it had been. Clean, empty, the covered mirror undisturbed. The only difference was the water in the toilet bowl, which was dark, almost black, and when Jacob looked closer, he saw what might have been handprints on the inside of the bowl, dozens of them, small as a child's. He didn't flush it. Some instinct told him that would be a mistake, that whatever had happened during that dark hour had left a residue that needed to dissipate on its own. Back at the counter, Jacob added to his notebook, his hand shaking so badly the words were nearly illegible. 3 rules survived. 4 more to go. He checked his phone. 5:14 a.m. Emily had sent another text. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about you. Can't wait for you to come home." The message should have comforted him, but instead it filled Jacob with dread. Had that been Emily texting, or had something from the bathroom somehow reached through the digital connection to test him further? He wanted to call her, to hear her voice and confirm it was really her, but he was terrified of what might answer. A notification popped up on the gas station's computer. A customer requesting pump 3. Jacob's blood went cold. The screen showed a vehicle at pump 3, waiting, but when he looked out the window, the pump area was empty. The computer was lying, or showing him something that existed in a different layer of reality. He declined the transaction, and the notification disappeared. Outside, he heard an engine start, heard gravel crunch on her tires, heard something drive away. But the parking lot remained empty to his eyes. 5:27 a.m. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, the absolute black of night giving way to the deep blue of pre-dawn. Jacob had never been so grateful to see the approach of sunrise. Rule 5 and 6 lay ahead, but they seemed manageable compared to what he'd already endured. The radio crackled, and this time, instead of static or old music, Jacob heard something new, a news report but wrong. The announcer discussed events that hadn't happened, a war that hadn't started, a president who hadn't been elected. The date given was 2037, 12 years in the future. Jacob listened, transfixed, as the report detailed a world that might be a timeline that branched from this moment. Then the radio switched back to Patsy Cline, and the moment of temporal displacement ended. Jacob added it to his notebook, wondering if Dodge had experienced similar phenomena, if every night shift workers saw glimpses of other winds and wares, or if the gas station tailored its revelations to each individual. Outside, a semi-truck pulled in, and the driver came inside for coffee and a sandwich. He was gruff, normal, gloriously mundane. Jacob had never been so happy to make small talk about weather and road conditions. The driver left, and the eastern horizon showed the first hints of orange. 5:43 a.m. Jacob read Rule 5 and 6, preparing himself. If a customer asked for directions to the old place, tell them it burned down in 1952. Never serve anyone who casts no reflection. Both seemed straightforward compared to the darkness of the bathroom hour. But Jacob had learned not to trust appearances in this place. The gas station settled into a waiting stillness, the calm before whatever the final rules would bring. Jacob stood behind the counter, watching the sunrise begin in earnest, and wondered if he would see it complete, or if the final minutes of his shift held one last test that would prove beyond his ability to survive. The pre-dawn light brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The oppressive weight that had pressed against the gas station all night began to lift, like a fog burning off under the promise of the sun. But Jacob knew better than to relax. 2 rules remained, and then the final instruction. Lock the door at 5:55 a.m. and wait for full sunrise. At 5:31 a.m., an old pickup truck pulled into the lot, its paint oxidized to a dull gray, its bed loaded with what looked like antique furniture. The driver was a man in his 70s, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt, his face deeply lined and weathered. He came inside, the door chime announcing his arrival, and approached the counter with the slow, deliberate movements of someone whose joints protested every step. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly. "Morning, sir. What can I help you with?" The old man studied Jacob for a long moment, his eyes sharp despite his age. "You looking for the old place?" he asked. Jacob's heart skipped. Rule 5. He forced his voice to remain steady. The old place burned down in 1952. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition or satisfaction. Jacob couldn't tell which. "That's so. Shame. Was hoping to see it one more time before I pass." He smiled, revealing gaps where teeth should be. "You're a quick study boy. Most new ones hesitate. Try to ask what old place. Play stupid. You'll do fine." "What was it?" Jacob asked before he could stop himself. "The old place, I mean." The man leaned against the counter, and Jacob noticed his reflection in the window behind him was clear and normal, which meant he was safe, human, bound by the same rules of reality that Jacob nominally still belonged to. "Nobody rightly knows anymore," the old man said. "Was here before the gas station, before the highway, before Wyoming was even a state. Some kind of way station, my great-grandfather said. Place where travelers would stop, rest, trade. But not all the travelers were coming from places you could reach by horse or wagon." He paused, pulling out a worn wallet. "The thing is, the old place never really burned down. That's why the lie works. The things that ask for it already know it's still here, still exists. They're testing you, seeing if you'll play along with the fiction that keeps them at bay." He bought a pack of gum, paid in normal currency, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Sunrise is coming. You'll make it." But here's something they don't put in the rules. This place marks you. You worked one night. You can always work here. You'll be able to see things other folks can't. Notice what doesn't fit. It's a gift and a curse. He touched the brim of his cap. Good luck, son. The truck pulled away, heading west toward the mountains that were now visible as dark shapes against the lightening sky. Jacob added the encounter to his notebook, his hand steady now. He was so close. Less than 30 minutes remained. 5:41 a.m. The door opened again, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The woman who entered was beautiful in an unsettling way, her features too perfect, like a sculpture of idealized humanity. She wore a white dress that seemed to glow faintly in the fluorescent light, and her movements had the same uncanny smoothness as the tooth-paying man from earlier. She walked directly to the counter, and Jacob forced himself to look at her face, to meet her eyes. They were completely black, no whites, no iris, just reflective darkness like pools of oil. She smiled, and her teeth were normal but too many, her mouth containing at least twice the number it should. "Coffee, please," she said, her voice like wind chimes. Jacob moved to the coffee station, poured a cup, brought it back to the counter. As he set it down, he glanced to the window behind her. The parking lot was visible, the pumps, the highway beyond, but no reflection of a woman. The coffee cup appeared to float in midair in the window's reflection, supported by nothing. Rule 6. Never serve anyone who casts no reflection. Jacob's hand moved toward the cup, intending to pull it back, but the woman's hand shot out with impossible speed, gripping his wrist. Her skin was ice cold, her grip crushing. "The pumps are temporarily offline." Jacob gasped, the pain in his wrist making his vision blur. "I apologize." The woman's smile widened, showing even more teeth, rows of them receding back into her throat. For a moment, Jacob was certain she would refuse to play by the rules, that she would hurt him anyway. But then she released his wrist and stepped back. "How unfortunate," she said, her tone suggesting amusement rather than disappointment. "Perhaps another time." She walked toward the door, her movements becoming more fluid, less human, until she seemed to be gliding rather than walking. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. "You're stronger than the last one. He broke on the third night. I wonder how long you'll last." Then she was gone, and when Jacob looked out the window, there was no vehicle in the lot, no sign anyone had been there. His wrist bore the marks of her fingers, frost patterns etched into his skin that slowly faded as circulation returned. 5:49 a.m. 6 minutes until lockdown. The sky outside was transitioning from deep blue to lighter shades, the stars fading. Jacob could see the distinct line of the horizon now, could see the shape of the landscape that had been hidden in darkness all night. 2 more customers came through in those final minutes. Both were normal, routine, unremarkable. Jacob processed their transactions with mechanical efficiency, his eyes constantly flicking to the clock. 5:52, 5:53, 5:54. At 5:55 a.m. exactly, Jacob walked to the front door and turned the lock. The deadbolt slid home with a solid thunk that felt like sealing a vault. He returned to his position behind the counter and waited, every nerve on edge. For 2 minutes, nothing happened. The gas station sat in perfect stillness, the only sounds a hum of refrigerators and the tick of the wall clock. Then, at 5:57, Jacob heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside, approaching the door. They were heavy, deliberate, accompanied by a dragging sound as though something was being pulled behind the walker. The footsteps stopped at the door, and Jacob heard breathing, wet and labored. A shadow appeared in the frosted glass window of the door, tall and impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong. The door handle rattled, once twice testing. Jacob gripped the counter's edge, his eyes locked on the door. Rule 7 was explicit. If something knocks, do not answer. But what if it didn't knock? What if it just tried to force its way in? The rattling stopped. Silence. Then, a voice from outside. Multiple voices speaking in unison. Men and women and children all forming the same words. We know you're in there. We know you can hear us. We've been waiting all night. Just open the door. Just for a moment. We have so much to show you. Jacob's mouth was desert dry. The voices continued, patient and persuasive. You've done so well. You followed all the rules. Don't you want to understand why? Don't you want to see what you've been protecting yourself from? Open the door and we'll explain everything. We'll show you the truth of this place. It was tempting, terrifyingly tempting. Jacob had spent the entire night in fear and confusion, following rules without understanding their purpose. The promise of explanation, of comprehension, called to him like a siren song. But he remembered the scars on Dodge's arm, the warning in the old man's eyes, the frost patterns the reflectionless woman had left on his skin. Understanding came with a price he wasn't willing to pay. We can wait, the voices said, losing their persuasive tone, becoming colder. We're patient. You have to leave eventually. You have to sleep. You have to close your eyes. And when you do, we'll still be here, waiting. 5:59 a.m. 1 minute to sunrise. Jacob could see the first rays of the sun touching the tops of the distant mountains, turning them gold against the purple sky. The shadow at the door grew more agitated, pressing against the glass, which began to frost over despite the warming temperature. The voices became frantic. Open the door, open the door, open the door, open the... 6 a.m. The sun's edge cleared the horizon, and a beam of direct sunlight hit the gas station. The shadow at the door recoiled as if burned, the voices cutting off midward. Jacob heard that dragging sound again, retreating, moving away from the building rapidly. Within seconds, the only sound was the wind and the morning song of birds he hadn't realized had started singing. Jacob approached the door slowly, peering through the frosted glass. The parking lot was empty, normal, bathed in the golden light of dawn. He unlocked the door and stepped outside. The world was transformed. What had been an oppressive, threatening darkness was now simply a gas station on a Wyoming highway, modest and mundane. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of sage and distant rain. A pickup truck was pulling into the lot, and Jacob could see it was Dodge, arriving for the day's shift. Dodge climbed out of his truck, a thermos in hand, and walked over to Jacob. He studied the younger man's face, taking in the exhaustion, the shell-shocked expression, the bruises and marks visible on his arms. You made it, Dodge said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. Wasn't sure you would. The first night is always the hardest because you don't really believe it yet. You think it might be a joke, might be in your head. He paused. But you know now. You know it's real. Jacob nodded, unable to form words. Dodge clapped him on the shoulder. Go home. Sleep. Don't try to make sense of what you saw. You'll be back tomorrow night, and it'll be easier. Not easy, but easier. You learn the rhythms. Learn to feel when something's coming. After a few months, it becomes almost routine. How long have you been doing this? Jacob finally managed to ask. 11 years on night shift. 23 years total if you count a day shifts when I was younger. Dodge smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The day shift has its own rules, but they're gentler. Whatever comes through at night is more direct in its hunger. Jacob walked to his truck, his legs shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. As he reached for the door handle, he noticed something that made his heart sink. On the back of his left hand, barely visible in the dawn light, was a mark. Not a bruise or a scar, but something else. A symbol that looked like it had been branded into his skin with invisible ink. It was only visible at certain angles, but once he'd seen it, he couldn't unsee it. Dodge had said the place marked you. Jacob understood now. This wasn't just a job he could quit. He'd been claimed somehow, tied to the Desert Rose gas station by forces he didn't understand. The generous pay wasn't compensation for difficulty. It was payment for a bond that went deeper than employment. He climbed into his truck and started the engine, pulling out of the lot as the sun continued its climb into the sky. In his rearview mirror, he watched the gas station recede, looking innocent and ordinary in the morning light. But he knew the truth now. When darkness fell again, it would transform back into what it really was: a way station between worlds, a threshold where things that shouldn't exist came to trade, to test, to hunger. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Morning. How was your night?" Jacob stared at the message, trying to figure out how to respond. How could he explain that he'd spent 8 hours in a place where reality was optional, where the rules that govern existence were written by entities that preceded human understanding? How could he tell her that he'd been marked, claimed, changed in ways he was only beginning to comprehend? He typed back, "Interesting. Tell you about it when I get home." Another lie of omission, another secret added to the collection he was already accumulating. The old man had been right. The place marked you, and once marked, you could never fully return to the world of people who didn't know, who couldn't see, who lived their lives blissfully unaware that places like the Desert Rose gas station existed. Jacob drove into the rising sun, toward home and sleep and the temporary comfort of normalcy. But in the back of his mind, he was already counting down the hours until 11:47 p.m., when he would return to the gas station for his second night, to face whatever new horrors awaited in the darkness. The Desert Rose kept its secrets, but it had shared them with Jacob now, and whether he wanted it or not, he was part of those secrets. The rules would protect him, as long as he followed them. But each night would take something from him, leaving marks that couldn't be seen, but would accumulate nonetheless. As his truck disappeared down Highway 87, the gas station sat quiet in the morning sun, waiting. It had waited for decades, for centuries, for perhaps even longer. It would continue waiting, patient and eternal, for the darkness to return and bring with it the strange travelers who existed between the spaces of the world. And Jacob, marked and claimed, would be there to meet them, to follow the rules that kept the threshold balanced, to serve as a watcher at the border between the known and the unknowable. The story of the Desert Rose gas station didn't end. It never ended. It simply waited for night to fall again.